Welcome back to the Ultimate Historical Figures Iceberg. This is part 3 where we'll be continuing on tier 3 of the iceberg. If you haven't already, please check out parts 1 and 2 beforehand and subscribe. Julius Caesar. In 100 BCE, Gaius Julius Caesar, or simply known as Julius Caesar, was born in the city of Rome. Rome at the time was still a republic with leaders chosen from the wealthy, powerful families. Caesar grew up in a patrician family, which were basically Roman aristocrats. Being of the noble class meant that patricians were able to participate in government and politics. Regardless, life wasn't always smooth sailing. His family lost a lot of its influence, and young Julius realized early on that if he wanted to make a mark on the world, he'd have to work hard and play his cards right. When Julius was a teenager, Rome was filled with political chaos and backstabbing, and things took a dark turn for him. At just 16 years old, his father died, leaving him the head of his family. On top of that, Rome's leader at the time, Sulla, saw Caesar as a potential enemy. Julius had to flee Rome to avoid being executed. Even though his life was in danger, Caesar made an effort to keep surviving. After escaping danger, Caesar joined the Roman military, where he quickly proved himself to be a brilliant soldier and leader. His bravery in battle earned him rewards and honors, and after Sulla's death, Caesar safely returned back to Rome. Back in the city, he started making friends with powerful allies like Pompey the Great and Crassus, well known for being some of the most influential men in Rome. Together, they formed the first triumvirate. But he wanted more power, and he knew the way to gain it was by leading successful military campaigns. One of Caesar's most famous adventures was his campaign in Gaul, which was modern-day France and Belgium. He led Roman armies into huge battles, conquering tribes and expanding Rome's territory, and thus he became a war hero who wrote detailed reports about his victories that made him even more popular with the people of Rome. They loved reading about his battles and victories. During this time, Caesar also invaded Britain twice. Even though he didn't stay there for long, it was the first time the Roman army had ever reached the mysterious island, and it made him even more of an iconic figure. After his victories in Gaul, Caesar returned to Rome, but not everyone was happy about his success. Some of the Roman leaders, including Pompey, started seeing Caesar as a threat to their power. They ordered him to give up his army and return to Rome peacefully. But here's the thing, Caesar wasn't the kind of guy to easily back down. Instead of surrendering, he made a bold move. In 49 BCE, he crossed the Rubicon River into Rome with his army, which was illegal because Roman generals weren't allowed to bring their troops into the city. Due to this, Caesar declared civil war against his enemies in Rome. And as he crossed the river, he reportedly said the famous words, "The die is cast," meaning there was no turning back. Caesar's army defeated Pompey and his allies in 45 BCE. He returned to Rome as the most powerful man in the city. He was declared dictator for life, which gave him almost unlimited power. However, some feared that Caesar would destroy the Republic and make himself king. Despite being at the top of his game, Caesar's rise to power made him way too many enemies. On March 15th, 44 BCE, a group of senators, including his close friend Brutus, decided to assassinate him to protect the Republic. They stabbed him to death in the Senate, and his final words were, according to the legends, the iconic phrase, "You too, Brutus?" Julius Caesar's death sent shockwaves to Rome and led to more chaos. So why is he so influential? Well, to put it simply, by reforming the Roman government, he essentially laid the foundation for what later became the Roman Empire. Julius Caesar was the great uncle to Augustus, who would become the first ruler of the empire. Remarkably, nearly 2,000 years later, the Roman Empire is still recognized as one of the 25 largest empires in human history. Augustus. Sometime after the birth of Julius Caesar, in 63 BCE, Gaius Octavius was born in Rome. Octavius isn't the name that he would be known by. He would grow up to become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, and one of the most important figures in history. Augustus was born to a pretty well-off family, but no one could have guessed that he would go on to rule an entire empire. His great-uncle was Julius Caesar, the famous general and leader, and this connection would soon shape his life. When Augustus was only 18 years old, everything changed. Julius Caesar was assassinated, and in his will, Caesar named Augustus, back then called Octavian, as his heir. Imagine that, you're just a teenager and suddenly you're expected to become the successor of the greatest leader Rome had ever known. But Augustus was determined and intelligent. He quickly began building power of his newfound status. Rome at the time was still in total chaos. There were power struggles, wars, and everybody wanted to be one in charge. Augustus formed an alliance called the Second Triumvirate with Mark Antony, one of Caesar's top generals, and Lepidus, who fought alongside Julius in defeating their Roman enemies. Together, they defeated the people who had killed Julius Caesar and took control of Rome. The alliance didn't last forever. Eventually, Augustus and Mark Antony became rivals. Mark Antony had teamed up with Cleopatra, the famous queen of Egypt, and together, they challenged Augustus for the control of Rome. This led to one of the most famous battles in history, the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Augustus's forces won, and Mark Antony and Cleopatra both took their own lives. With his victory, Augustus became the undisputed ruler of Rome. In 27 BCE, Augustus became the first emperor of Rome, marking the beginning of the Roman Empire, which would go on to last for more than over 1,000 years. He took the title of Augustus, which means the revered one, and worked hard to bring peace and stability to Rome. This period was called the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, and it lasted about 200 years. Augustus built roads, aqueducts, and grand buildings, making Rome a center for culture and trades. Augustus died at the age of 75. He prepared his stepson, Tiberius, to become his next successor, and the second ruler of the Roman Empire, making sure that the transition of power was smooth. His last words, according to some sources, were, "Have I played my part well? Then applaud as I exit." Like he saw his life as a great play, a fitting end for someone who had turned Rome into a stage for greatness. So why is he so important? Augustus created a shift from the old Roman Republic, where Rome was ruled by elected officials, to the Roman Empire, where one person held most of the power. This change had made Rome more stable and efficient. His reforms in military, taxation, and government created a system that lasted for hundreds of years, and it became an inspiration for future empires. Augustus had a huge impact on art and architecture. He made Rome a city of marble with beautiful buildings, temples, and monuments that displayed the greatness of his empire. Many of the things that we think of as typical Roman achievements, like the grand arches, temples, and forms, were built or inspired by Augustus. Avicenna. Nearly 1,000 years ago, in 980 CE, in a small town of Avicenna, which is now Uzbekistan, Avicenna was born. His real name was Ibn Sina, but most people know him as Avicenna, one of the greatest minds of the ancient world. As a kid, Avicenna was quite literally a genius. By the time he was 10 years old, he had already memorized the entire Quran, which was the holy book of Islam. His father saw how talented his son was, so he made sure Avicenna got the best education possible. He studied science, philosophy, and medicine, and by the time he was 16, he was already learning medicine all by himself. Not only was he learning, he was also practicing medicine and becoming a doctor at a really young age. He was so good that he even managed to cure the local ruler of an illness that no other doctors could treat. And when he turned 18 years old, Avicenna had already become a master physician. He kept studying every subject he could find: astronomy, math, physics, philosophy, poetry, whatever. He learned all of it. He loved knowledge so much that he even stayed up late reading by candlelight just to learn more. One of his favorite things to do was solve really tough problems that no one else could figure out. But his life wasn't just about studying. It was also full of adventures and challenges. Back then, the region where Avicenna lived was full of different kingdoms and empires fighting for power, which meant Avicenna had to travel a lot. He worked for different rulers as a doctor, advisor, and even as a politician. He encountered dangerous situations, got imprisoned by a couple times, and had to deal with people who were jealous of his talents. But no matter what, Avicenna never gave up on his quest for knowledge. One of the biggest tasks that he took on was writing a book called The Canon of Medicine. And this wasn't just any book. It was the medicinal encyclopedia that explained everything doctors needed to know about the human body, diseases, and how to treat them. It became the most important medical book in the world for hundreds of years. Doctors across Europe and the Middle East used it as their main guide to understand how the body works. He also wrote books on philosophy, including the Book of Healing, where he talked about the life, the universe, and how we understand things. He was like a one-man university. Avicenna lived an incredibly busy life, always traveling, always learning, and always teaching, that eventually passed away at 1037 CE at the age of 56. Even though his life was short, he accomplished more than most people could in 10 lifetimes. He was buried at the Hamadan in modern-day Iran, and people still visit his tomb today to honor the influence he brought upon the world. Avicenna wasn't just a smart guy, he was a game changer who shaped the way we think about medicine, science, and philosophy. His defining work of the Canon of Medicine became the medicinal Bible for centuries, not just in the Middle East, but also in Europe. This book set him apart because it was the first to bring together all the medical knowledge known at the time in a way that was organized and easy to understand. Yet, his influence went far beyond medicine. He was a major figure in the world of philosophy too. His ideas about logic, existence, and knowledge influenced not only the Islamic world, but also famous European thinkers like Thomas Aquinas. During the Middle Ages, he helped fill the gap between Greek philosophy, like the ideas of Aristotle, and the world of the Middle Ages, making ancient wisdom accessible to newer generations. Archimedes. In 287 BCE, Archimedes was born in the city of Syracuse on the island of Sicily. Archimedes would be known as one of the greatest minds in history. He was born into a family that valued knowledge. His father was an astronomer, which meant Archimedes was surrounded by science and mathematics from a very young age. Archimedes traveled to Alexandria, Egypt to study, which was one of the most renowned centers of learning at the time. Alexandria had a massive library filled with books and scrolls about mathematics, astronomy, and engineering. Archimedes learned from the best teachers. One of his teachers was Pythagoras, and he eventually returned to Syracuse. One of the most famous stories about Archimedes happened while he was taking a bath. The king of Syracuse, King Hero II, asked Archimedes to determine whether a crown was made of pure gold or if it had been mixed with silver. Archimedes needed a way to solve this problem without damaging the crown. While he was in the bath, he noticed that the water level rose when he got in. This made him realize something important. He could measure the volume of the crown by seeing how much water it displaced. Since pure gold is denser than silver, if the crown had any silver mixed in, it would displace more water than a crown of the same weight made purely of gold. By measuring how much water was displaced, Archimedes could determine whether the crown was truly pure gold or not. Archimedes was so excited that this discovery made him jump out of the bath and ran through the streets shouting, "Eureka, Eureka," which means "I found it." Archimedes was also an incredible inventor. One of his most famous inventions was the Archimedes screw, a device that could lift water from lower areas to higher places. It was highly useful for irrigation, which is a term used for watering farmland to make it ready for agriculture, which helped farmers water their fields efficiently. He also designed innovative war machines to defend Syracuse when it was attacked by the Romans. He created giant catapults, cranes, and could lift enemy ships out of the water. And according to some legends, he even used mirrors to focus sunlight and set enemy ships on fire. Archimedes' greatest passion was mathematics. He made significant discoveries in geometry and was the first person to figure out how to measure the area and volume of different shapes, like spheres, cylinders, and cones. He also developed an early method for calculating pi, the number that helps us understand the properties of circles. He did this by inscribing and circumscribing polygons around a circle. Essentially, he drew shapes with many sides on both inside and outside the circle, and used the perimeters to estimate the value of pi. By increasing the number of the sides, he was able to get a closer and closer approximation of pi. Archimedes lived an extraordinary life, but unfortunately, it ended during a war. In 212 BCE, the Romans attacked Syracuse, and despite all of Archimedes' inventions, the city eventually fell. The story goes that a Roman soldier found Archimedes working on a math problem and ordered him to come with him. Archimedes refused, saying, "Don't disturb my circles." Because he was so focused on his work, the soldier, not understanding who Archimedes was, killed him. Archimedes was more than just a mathematician and inventor. He was a pioneer who fundamentally changed the structure of science and engineering. As mentioned, one of his famous stories was discovering the principle of buoyancy while in the bathtub. This principle helped explain why some objects float while others sink, and it became known as Archimedes' principle. Archimedes' influence extended beyond his lifetime. His ideas inspired later scientists like Galileo and Isaac Newton, who built upon his work to develop new theories in physics and calculus. Johannes Gutenberg. In 1400, in a city called Mainz, in what is now Germany, Johannes Gutenberg was born. Gutenberg came from a family of metalworkers, so he grew up around tools, metal, and craftsmanship. His father worked with coins, which meant Gutenberg was used to precision and learned about metalworking from a young age. Back in Gutenberg's time, books were super rare and really expensive because they were all in handwritten and by scribes, taking months or even years to just make one. Imagine copying a whole book by hand, page by page. It was exhausting and made books something only rich people could afford. Gutenberg wanted to change that. He dreamed of making books that required much less time and effort, and he had an idea that would make it happen. In 1440s, Gutenberg started working on his big invention, the printing press. He combined what he knew about metalworking and some clever new ideas. The printing press was like a giant stamp, but way more advanced. He used a concept called movable type, which were little metal letters that could be arranged to make a page. Then, he could ink the letters and press them onto paper, making copies of pages quickly and easily. This meant that for the first time, people could print many books instead of writing them out by hand. One of his first major projects was printing the Gutenberg Bible in 1455. This was a huge deal because it was one of the first major books ever printed with the movable type. Suddenly, books weren't just for the rich, they could be made faster and shared with more people. The Gutenberg Bible had beautiful lettering and people were amazed that something so perfect could be made by a machine. However, Gutenberg needed money desperately to build his printing press, so he had a man named Johannes Faust invest a lot of money into his idea. Unfortunately, Gutenberg couldn't pay Faust back, and Faust ended up taking Gutenberg to court. Gutenberg lost his printing press and many of his tools, which was a major setback. But even then, Gutenberg's ideas had already started to spread. His invention had sparked a literal revolution, and soon enough, printing presses were popping up all over Europe. Gutenberg continued to work in printing until he passed away in 1468. He didn't get rich or famous during his lifetime, but his invention changed the world forever. People now had the power to share knowledge through books, and that was more valuable than anything else. Johannes Gutenberg's printing press was one of the most important inventions in history. And before the printing press, books were rare, and most people couldn't read or write because they didn't have access to learning materials. Gutenberg's invention made it possible for ordinary people to get books and learn new things. This led to a massive spread of knowledge and ideas. Gutenberg's printing press also instigated the Reformation, a movement that changed the course of history, with books and pamphlets being printed quickly. New ideas about religion spread like wildfire, challenging old beliefs and giving people new ways to think about the world.